Greetings, salutations, and welcome to another Sunday sermon. I am Reverend Riff, your host for the day, and all the other days, really. I don't know why I made that sound like I don't host this every Sunday, but greetings and welcome. I hope you all are well. My apologies if I seem a little distracted this morning. We are about 15 minutes into a possible COVID scare, and so it's tons of fun. I don't care about myself much, but our little guy isn't feeling great, so we're gonna deal with that. But nothing we can do about that right this minute. So let's deal with things that we can control, which is talking about the Sunday sermon. We can do that, so we're going to do that. I hope everyone at home is well. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. I hope you had lots of food. I hope you got to spend it with people you care about. I know I did. That was a highlight for me. I hope that all of you had a similar experience. And if not, I hope next year is better for you. But yeah. So today we are going to talk about some crazy nonsense. But I feel like at first what we should do is have a little chat about a little event that happened to me on Thursday. I have a family member who shall remain nameless, who is. I apologize, crew. Give me 1 minute. Sorry about that. That was diving into this whole COVID craziness. So thanks for bearing with me. But yeah, so this family member decided to ask me a question about why I never became a youth pastor. And I basically, in attempt to deflect and not create the Thanksgiving, Donnybrook that you don't want, said I had some issues with the text and just didn't feel it would be right to be a pastor when I wasn't sure the text was real. I thought that would diffuse the situation. I was wrong. This family member wished to argue with me about the text. And I told him I really didn't want to get into all that, but that, you know, there was no. I said, my main thing. I said, the Gospels are complete malarkey. And I said, there's no even outside the Bible. I said, there's no text that says Jesus existed. And he goes, oh, yeah? What about Flavius Josephus? He was a Jew. He had every reason to denounce Christ, yet he attested to his resurrection and everything. I said, hold on, buddy. That's not true. And he says, oh, yeah. And he referenced what is known as the Testimonium Flavium. It is a section in Josephus' Antiquities of the Jews where he states that he says Jesus Christ, being a man, if you could even call him a man, was a teacher who did many great things, and he rose again after he was executed by Pilate, and blah 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 blah. And Christians, whenever you challenge them on the fact that the Bible, his kind of home book, is the only book that ever mentions this guy, and that he of that time, and that, yeah, when you get into later texts he's mentioned, but none of his contemporaries mentioned him, and they say yes, he did. Josephus did. There are two mentions in Josephus. The other one is almost assuredly total nonsense. It all it does is says that Ananias was deposed as the high priest, and that they took Jesus' brother James and stoned him. What most Christians won't tell you is that where it says Jesus, who was the Christ, that everybody knows Josephus would never have referred to him as the Christ. So that was clearly inserted by later Christian apologists. But what they don't tell you is that what he's likely referring to is a guy named Jesus of Damianus, who was jockeying for a position to be high priest. And he also had a brother named James, because there were like 5 names apparently in the ancient times. And that's who he's talking about, not Jesus Christ. So Ignore that section. But we're talking about the Testimonium Flavium, the one that seems to just fly in the face of good sense. Why would Josephus, why aren't more scholars shouting from the hills that Josephus himself, a well-respected historian, brought up Jesus and said that he knew he rose from the dead and referred to him as the Christ? Why? Because it's completely made up. If you read that section of Josephus's text, he's talking about something completely unrelated. And then all of a sudden he just launches into this amazing, you know, confirmation of Jesus being the Christ. And then all of a sudden he goes back to talking about what he was talking about before. It's like such an obvious cut and paste job that it's, just splice it right in here. As well as the fact that he uses wording that Josephus wouldn't have used. It's out of place. You will not find a single scholar today who believes that Josephus wrote that shit. But yet, this is what my family member was clinging to, and he was very taken aback when I confronted him with the fact that no scholar believes the Flavium Testimonium to be actually written by Josephus. At best, they think that Josephus could have, and the emphasis is on could, because I tend to side more with the scholars who don't even believe this much. But you have the guys who really don't want to make waves. They will say, well, Josephus confirmed that there was a guy named Jesus who was executed by Pilate, even though no Roman sources confirm that. But he did not call him the Christ. He did not say he did amazing things. He did not say he was raised from the dead. None of that happened. None of that. So I just thought we needed to get that out, because you will, if you espouse the views that I would say most of the people who tune in here on Sundays espouse, you will run into people who will try to tell you that Jesus is referenced in other places that aren't the Bible. And while that's true hundreds of years after his death, during his lifetime, during his contemporaries, even within the 60, Josephus wrote his stuff 70 years after Jesus died. It wasn't like he was a contemporary of the guy, but he was at least writing the history of the time that Jesus would have supposedly been alive. And Josephus has next to nothing to say about him. So he was so important that the Romans crucified him, but not important enough that Josephus ever mentioned him. Got it. Christian kayfabe. Kayfabe. Yep, Christian kayfabe. Alright, but now that we've done that little side journey, that side quest is over, let's head to the good stuff. So, we know how we start this season. We enter another heretic into our hall of heretic heroes. And this week, we've got a doozy, because this guy, he managed to piss everyone off on both sides of the Great Schism. That takes talent. Usually one side... Well, and he did this without being like a full-blown heretic, like saying God didn't exist. Because, yeah, something like that would piss off both sides. He managed to be like, oh, no, I'm into the group, but also you're both wrong. It did not work well for him. He was also, quite possibly, a renowned asshole. It is repeatedly referenced by people of the time that it wasn't just his arguments that upset people, it was the tone in which he made them. That makes him our kind of guy. So, without further ado, let us get to our homie here. But first, let's take a walk back through all of the Freds we've had. It's not Gordon Ramsay, although he might be a heretic. I'm not sure. So, who's in the hall so far? Well, first, we got our homie Giordano Bruno. Understood celestial mechanics. Also was a bit of an asshole. Got lit on fire. Got William of Ockham, who was just too logical for this nonsense. He managed to escape death because he was a pretty smart guy. We've got Minocchio. Fucking guy just stood up for the poor, for the common man, asked a lot of questions, didn't end well. And of course, Anne Askew, poet, preacher, whip sharp, just sharp as a tack with the razor's edge tongue. That didn't go well for her either. It says, who? Who could join our hollowed halls today? Well, it's none other than Michael Servetus. Look at that! Look at that collar. There's no coffee filters left because of this guy. He was a theologian who understood anatomy, and he didn't even molest any kids to do it. That we know of. He might have been a total creep, but there's no evidence of that. So, he was born in 1511, somewhere in Spain. That is seriously as specific as we can get with this guy. He was born somewhere in Spain. We really don't know where. We just know somewhere in Spain. He died in 1553 in Geneva. We're real sure of that. Oh, fucking pensive he looks there, just thinking about all the shit he's gonna start. This guy, you're about to fall in love. Let's talk about him. He was a true Renaissance man. He was skilled in math, science, art, and religion. He composed stories and poems. He did complex math. He had some scientific breakthroughs for white people at the time, and also was a noted theologian who asked many important questions that really made people upset. He was the first European to correctly describe the process of pulmonary circulation. And the reason I say the first European, not the first person, is that Muslim scientists were already completely on top of this, understood how the heart worked and all that, but they had the misfortune to be Muslim scientists in the 16th century, so no one was listening to them. But this guy, he was like, hey, you know, the heart, it pumps blood through the body. And what really made his revelation of that to people who would listen to him was that he did it in a text about theology. He was talking about giving your heart to God, and that the heart was what mattered, and that your heart had to guide you. And he said, as the heart pushes the blood through the body and creates the renewal, so does the God create renewal in you. And he was saying this stuff like it was just casual knowledge, probably because he had probably read some of the Muslim texts, because he was a pretty open-minded dude. And he just thought everybody else should know this. So yeah, first European to correctly describe how your heart works. Yay, Cervantes. He participated in the Reformation, and by the end of his life he had achieved, as I stated earlier, the unusual distinction, as the Catholics and the Protestants hated him. They were fighting over who got to kill this guy, even though he was, by his own admission, just asking questions. He also, fun side note, killed a guy in a sword fight, but was released from jail after it was deemed self-defense. He signed up for the fan club. Everybody hates this guy. But yeah, he apparently, because see, before he became a theologian, he was a doctor. And he was a skilled doctor, and at the time, doctors kind of operated in territories, much like old school wrestling promotions. And as he was traveling, one doctor felt he was encroaching on his territory, and this doctor and another man attacked Michael here, and Michael was able to fight them off and kill one of them with a sword. Like, this guy's a badass. The doctors did get championship belts. Absolutely. I refuse to accept any other thought than the doctors of the time had championship belts. So, our sword-wielding Renaissance man here, what did he do? How did this obviously cool guy piss everyone off? Well, he worked hard at it. He became obsessed with theology later in his life. He as I said, he had become a physician first. And then, to him, understanding the spiritual and the physical was a lifelong dream. He wanted to reconcile spirituality with medical learning. Again, cool guy. He was an avid denier of the Trinity. He felt that it was a man-made construction with no basis in Scripture. I mean, he was right, but they didn't want to hear that. The Trinity is definitely something that the church posits to try to make sense of all the different texts and the way they make God seem so different. If you look at the Apostle Paul's writings, which came before the Gospels, as we know, Jesus is not a flesh and blood Jesus. His Jesus is more of the Holy Spirit revealing himself and revealing knowledge to him, and kind of this ethereal being. That's not the God that the Gospels talk about, the flesh and blood man who came down from a father. And instead of having people wondering, are you guys all really talking about the same story? They said, of course we're talking about the same fucking story. It's 3 in 1. Duh, it's not hard. And then they spent the next 5,000, 1,000 years plus fighting with each other over that interpretation of the 3 in 1. Because they're bad people. Cervantes strongly disagreed with infant baptism. He wrote, "It is an invention of the devil, an infernal falsity for the destruction of all Christianity." That's the one that the Catholic Church really didn't appreciate. Because, you see, part of the thing with the Catholic Church was baptize the baby. Now they're in the church for the long haul. You can now make them feel. This guy is Gordon Ramsay. He does not mince words. He does not mince words. And he also doesn't stop talking just because someone stops talking to him, as we'll find out. But yeah, this one really cheesed off the Catholic Church. Again, he's right. There's no biblical text for infant baptism. That is all Catholic mysteries of the faith. He believed Christians should discuss their differences of theological opinion openly and without condemnation. I mean, he was looking for open dialogue about theology. What a fucking maniac this guy was. The belief that sealed his fate, that belief sealed his fate, as he sent letters that were used as evidence against him. His critics also state that he refused to show any fealty towards church leaders. His tone, as it were, was also a key factor in the decision to prosecute him. Yeah, wait till you see who he took the tone with, because that's what really did it. It's not just that he had a tone, but that he had a tone with some big wigs. The Catholic coffers, probably. Yeah, and get them young in Catholic speak is real creepy. Welcome, Barry. Now, as you'll notice, I have Catholics / Protestants at the top because, yes, this guy is a dual threat. He had them angry on both sides. Again, his thing of the Trinity makes so much sense. That there's just one God, and that he has different facets. He deals with people in different ways. He kind of becomes what they need him to become to understand, which to me is totally what an all-powerful being would do. The church was like, nope, damn it, they're 3 different beings, but they all live in one body because it's complicated and that's what we like. Don't ask me. This one. He rejected predestination. He stated that if God just picked and chose, and that if God decided before you were ever born, before you ever had a shot at free will, that you were a bad person and you were going to hell, that would mean that you never had a chance and it would destroy free will. Because, again, he's right. This whole, God knows you were going to reject him anyway, so that's nonsense. That's the hardening Pharaoh's heart bullshit. We've already been over that tip. We're not dealing with it. But yeah, he rejected predestination. John Calvin, of course, they call predestination Calvinism for a reason. People refer to being a 4-star or 5-star Calvinist. So yeah, not the guy to go at. He's corresponded with Calvin about this in exchange of letters, and that many of the letters have still survived to this day. And they get less and less cordial as the exchange of letters goes on. Eventually, Calvin said, I'm done talking to you. You are a blasphemer and a heretic. you are rejecting this thing that God told me is the truth. Meanwhile, Calvin made that shit up. When Calvin no longer would respond to him, he kept sending letters. At least 17. Yeah, he did not get ghosted. He just kept sending letters, calling Calvin out, and again, barking in a fairly accusatory tone. He basically, by the end of the letters, tells Calvin, I see what you did. You set yourself up as a god among these people by making up this shit. Like, he flat out accused Calvin of being L. Ron Hubbard, which, kind of right. Calvin was notoriously defensive of his teachings and the place in society that their acceptance had allowed him to attain. Geneva was, yeah, it did work out for L. Ron. So, yeah, Geneva was totally under the Protestant thumb. And as Calvin being kind of the accepted father of the Protestant movement at that point, he played a huge role in the politics of Geneva. So much so that he was allowed to flaunt the law blatantly. We'll get to that in just a second. Calvin hated him so much that he openly spoke of how much he'd like to kill him. This is a direct quote from Calvin. Serventus has just sent me a long volume of his ravings. If I consent, he will come here, because Serventus wanted to come have these discussions in person. But I will not give my word, for if he comes here, if my authority is worth anything, I will never permit him to depart alive. That's the leader of the Protestant movement there, folks, saying how much he wants to kill this guy who doesn't agree with him. Because apparently a part of Protestant dogma that did not make the cut was the turn the other cheek thing. That apparently not important. So how'd that work out for him? It worked out like you think it did. A friend of Calvin's made an accusation of heresy against him in 1553 that led to his imprisonment in Vienne by the Roman Catholic Church. He was in France. They said, hey, this guy's a heretic. My buddy Calvin told me so. The Catholic Church is like, look, we don't like Calvin either, but this guy, he's causing problems. He was sentenced to be burned along with his writings as a heretic. But he had managed to escape prison because he wasn't quite done being dope. And so an effigy was made of him from his books, and it was burned instead. Because the only thing Catholics love destroying as much as people is literature. After his escape from Vienne, he stopped in Geneva for reasons that absolutely no one can figure out. I got nothing here. I have looked, and short of flat out having some kind of misplaced belief that Calvin really wouldn't kill him, I can find no reason as to why he would have gone to Geneva. He knew that Calvin was in charge there. He knew from the tone of the letters they had exchanged that Calvin did not like him. And when you're a heretic on the run from the Catholic Church, you could assume that, like, the church that doesn't like the Catholic Church would embrace you if the guy who was also the head of their church didn't hate you, which he does. So I have no idea what he was thinking, but he went to Geneva. And he attended a sermon by Calvin. Elron, or like Sauron. Love it. Yeah, he attended a sermon given by Calvin. And to no one's shock, was promptly arrested. Like, no idea. Calvin provided the letters sent to him by Servetus as evidence against him. And although he was a true scumbag. Now, this needs a little bit of context, so I'm going to give it to you. You see, Geneva law was very interesting. And in Geneva court cases, if you if you were the lead plaintiff in a case and you were the one lodging these, articles of heresy against someone, it was common for you to be sequestered. And while you wouldn't necessarily be arrested, you would be confined so as to not spread. Basically think of when a jury is sequestered. They did this with the plaintiffs as well. Only Calvin didn't have to do that. Because what Calvin did is Calvin did this behind a shadow. He had his top guy, his leader of his little school of divinity, go and be the formal face of the one who was accusing Cervantes. That way he could be sequestered and he would be the one whose name would be on all the trial documents as the accuser, because Calvin was also very concerned about his image and did not want his image to be one of a man who was so petty as to take someone who disagreed with him and have him executed. Riff Riders anthem, Jesus Christ. So, and the apologists for Calvin now claim that, he was very old and that his health was not the best and that he was so indispensable to the daily politics of Geneva that to have him sequestered would have just ground things to a halt. So it was totally okay that even though any evidence he gave shouldn't have been admissible since he was not the complainant of record, that was all ignored because Geneva did what Calvin told them. So to me, that's just a really scumbag move of, you're going to accuse a guy, demand his life, but then not participate in the trial because it's not convenient for you. It's convenient for you to have this guy killed, and it's convenient for you to violate his rights. Really, you couldn't even pretend to play along with due process, Calvin? You fucking dick. We do not like John Calvin on this program. We hate John Calvin. Well, I think we know how this goes. After his conviction on 2 counts of heresy, Calvin really upped the douchebaggery here by formally asking that they behead Cervantes before his burning to lessen his suffering, when he knew full well that it would be denied because that just wasn't allowed. That was not how it worked. So he made his big show of, I don't want him to suffer even though the law says we have to execute him. And so they denied it. They took Cervantes there. He sang hymns on his way, sang psalms, while they piled him up on a pile of his writings and burned him. And his last words were asking God to welcome his spirit. That's it, folks. That's how it worked. Really not cool by any stretch of the imagination by John Calvin. He is as big a villain as you will find. It appalls me that some of the well-meaning people that are still involved in church do not understand what a dickhole John Calvin was. He's no better than L. Ron Hubbard or anybody else who basically set up their own religious fiefdom to benefit themselves. Except for, millions of people have been duped by these idiots for thousands of years, and here we are. He really should have told Calvin to lick his sack. I mean, what is he going to do? You're already on fire. But yeah, that's Cervantes. What a cool guy. And he he escaped getting killed by the Roman Catholics only to get killed by the Protestants. That takes some doing. And if the afterlife was real, man, I would be my first question to him was the trip to Geneva, why? Unless, was he that big of a dick that he's like, I don't give a fuck if this guy wants to kill me or not. I'm going to show up and tell him he's an asshole to his face. Which, yeah, escaped to go watch a Calvin sermon. Not really sure where that was going. It didn't go well, But you know what? Had he just gotten away, it might not be as interesting of a story. And we might not know what a dick Calvin is. Maybe he showed up there just to expose what a dick Calvin was. And he was willing to die if it proved to everyone else what a dick Calvin was. One thing that was interesting, Servetus' death allowed people to start talking about his works more. They didn't have to be as underground when the author's already dead. So it actually... yeah. This is my movie. Nothing bad can happen. Didn't work out that way. So that's our heretic hero. Now, we're going to move along to this week's part of the sermon. We're going to talk about my favorite deuterocanonical text. Deuterocanonical text. That's a fun word. Bel and the Dragon. This one isn't even like its own book, as it's like the extended director's edition of Daniel. It's great. The Book of Daniel, it was written between 167 and 164 BCE. First half in Aramaic, the second half was written in Hebrew. Now, we know it was written in those years because it talks about a certain king, and it talks about a lot of shit happening up into his life until right before he died. And we know he died around 164 BCE. So everything that is mentioned about him, this text would have had to have been written right up to that point, but not to the point where he died. So that's how we have a pretty good date on when this book was written. Sometime thereafter, 3 additional sections were introduced. The additions are very noticeable, as in the earliest Greek copies of this, we notice those sections. But the Hebrew copies of this don't. And no one has really ever figured out exactly why that happened or who did it, other than what it appears is that a Jewish scholar who was probably a Greek speaker, almost had to be a Greek speaker, when he was copying these down, decided to include these other texts basically to expand the book. And the Greeks went with it, the Hebrews didn't. Most Christians recognize the expansion pack. Most people are into it because there's some pretty fun stories. The Protestant Bible outright rejects them. Someone just didn't want to translate it. It's like, this is longer, fuck this, I'm done. Protestants claim that the exclusion from the Hebrew manuscripts justifies their own exclusion. And it's more likely because these stories are fun. Yeah, it's Dextal DLC. Welcome, sure. Yeah, it's just some DLC. It's just fun. So we need to take just a second and get some context of Daniel. So the book of Daniel, we get that it's written right in somewhere in the mid to, earlier of this half of the 2nd century. And it basically talks about things going on in Israel, or for the Israeli people rather, in the 4th century. It's not a free update. Definitely not. Cost you 10%. But it... and what it does is the book of Daniel, it's wild. This book it's nothing but stories about Daniel being a badass. And that he is this like mystical wizard, super elevated, guy. And it's always made very clear that it's just because of his God. That because Daniel worships the one true God, he's untouchable. And he is in the king's court, and he hangs out with the kings of Babylon and shows them zero respect. And basically kind of acts like a douche. And everybody's like, yeah, but he's right all the time. It must be his God. It is never explained why, if the king repeatedly sees Daniel do this amazing shit with his God. And literally at every chance he get, Daniel humiliates the gods of the Babylonians. Why the Babylonians don't switch sides, that's never explained. Exactly what it is. That's exactly what it is. But yeah, Daniel, it's an odd book. It's worth a read. It's not real long, and it's got everything from disembodied hands writing on walls, crazy, eschatological prophecies, monsters. Book of Daniel has it all. Intrigue. It's got everything you're looking for in a crazy ass book. Like I said, it's not your typical book of the Bible. What it is actually it's a collection of court tales. Just things that had happened around the Babylonian court that had been in circulation. People had told these stories for years, and somebody finally decided to write them down. And for some reason, the Bible was like, yeah, we should totally put these in. Actually, we'll get to why. The name Daniel was likely chosen as a pseudonym because of its use in mystic circles. In many Hebrew mystic traditions, there's a kind of a hero named Daniel. Kind of like naming your guy Kal-El would be a Superman reference, or, if you name a king Arthur, you're clearly referencing that mythology. Daniel kind of just gave you the impression that he was a mystical guy. The prophecies in it seem to very clearly point to the historical events at the end of the Babylonian Empire and the rise of the Medes and Persians. Unless you're an evangelical. Because despite it being one of the more fantastic books with just lots of crazy stuff that's just taken at face value. Like, all this weird stuff happens in the book of Daniel and people are just like, oh yeah, it's Daniel. But yet evangelicals look at this evangelicals look at this and they look at all these prophecies that are very clearly Daniel talking about the changing of the guard and world power. And they see these as having links to Revelation. Mainly because whoever wrote Revelation was clearly familiar with Daniel and cribbed a lot of it. We talked about that. But no. Evangelicals are like, no, it all links together. It doesn't link together. There's nothing to link together. Stop linking things together, you fucking crazy people. There's nothing to link together. Daniel's talking about world politics. Daniel, there's even mistakes in there that they just basically retcon. Where at one point, Daniel prophesies that the tabernacle in, the temple in Israel will lay in ruin for 70 years after it was destroyed by the Babylonians. And then 70 years passes, and Daniel goes, oh, I was wrong. When I said 70 years, I meant that 70 weeks of years. So actually 490 years. Just a slight recalculation. Not 70 years, 490 years, because, yeah. That's the kind of book you're dealing with, and yet people are absolutely convinced that this thing, talks about the end of the world and all that shit because people are insane. So, Bel and the Dragon. Yes, the world is ending in 2022 type of logic. Yes. Bel and the Dragon is my favorite addition to Daniel. It is 3 little stories that are tacked on at the end of the book that in Catholic Bibles appear, but in Protestant Bibles do not. Unfortunately, regular dragon, and I should give everybody a trigger warning. If you like dragons as much as I do, you're not going to like this book. So Bel and the Dragon is it's what's titled to these 3 stories that are given. 2 of them are completely original stories that don't appear anywhere else in the book of Daniel. The third one gives some context to one of Daniel's most famous stories. If you ask just about any religious person, when you think of Daniel, they go, and the lion's den. Daniel and the lion's den. It's become synonymous. You say Goliath, people say, yeah, the Bible makes dragons sucks. Exactly. This is traumatic. Yeah, Daniel versus Bel. It is an early version of the locked room mystery, which is why I think it's so cool. Everybody in their life has heard some variation of the locked room mystery. Daniel was doing that shit 2,300 years ago. They were talking about the locked room mystery. Daniel versus the Dragon is just really goofy. There's literally no point to it. It is just some Jewish author dunking on Persian religion and folklore. I mean, it's fanfic that just kind of shits on Persian people. It makes no sense. It's great. And the revised Lion's Den story incorporates a popular story technique and adds a little backstory to a previous tale. Yeah, there was, if you see that picture there, with the angel flying a dude by his hair, that was really common in medieval stories at the time. Was like somebody teleporting into a story from way far away and being drawn into a story that had previously been told with no part of this guy. That was really common in medieval stories, to just add randos to your story. That's what Bel and the Dragon does here with the Daniel and the Lion's Den tale. So let's dive in. These won't take long, and they're tons of fun. So, Hungry Hungry Bel. I don't know how else to go with this. Bel was a god that was worshipped by the King Cyrus. And King Cyrus looks over at Daniel and goes, "Dude, why don't you worship Bel?" Exactly like Thermopylae. Welcome, Chris. So, yeah, he goes, "Hey, Daniel, why don't you worship Bel?" Daniel flat out laughs right in the king's face and goes, "Because he's just an idol, dude. It's wood with some bronze around it. Or clay, I'm sorry, with bronze around it." He goes, "It's not a real being. You worship a statue, man." And the king says, "Oh, yeah? Well, we give a huge offering of food to that idol every night, and it's gone the next day. Explain that, Christian." I get that he wasn't a Christian. Daniel actually worshipped El, which is fucking awesome. So Daniel worships the big fucking space dragon. Each day, Bel was provided 12 bushels of flour, 40 sheep. I'm assuming these sheep had been cooked. I don't think there were just 40 sheep wandering around in the temple room. Maybe they were. That would make the story even more interesting when we get to what's going on here. And 6 measures of wine. I don't know how much a measure of wine is. I don't know if it's a bottle or not, but some kind of portion of wine, bunch of sheep, and a dozen bushels of flour. Every day Bel was provided this, and every day it was gone. So, what's the king supposed to think, other than Bel was clearly eating this stuff? Bel has 70 priests, and the number 70 is a recurring theme in Daniel that was as I mentioned earlier, the first time that they prophesied the temple would lay in ruins was just going to be 70 years, and then it was, no, I meant 70 weeks of years, so 490 years, because I'll be dead by then and no one will care if I got this wrong. But, so the king, he goes to his priests, and he's like, "Guys, Daniel says that Baal isn't real." And they're like, "Oh, he's clearly real." And he goes, "I know, right? The stuff disappears every night. How else could it if he's not real?" And so the king says, "We're going to put that food in there again tonight, and we're going to close the temple like we always do. We're going to seal the door with my signet ring. That way we know that nobody can come or go. And then if the food is there tomorrow morning, then that means somebody's been stealing it. All you priests, you're all dead meat. But if the food is gone, Daniel, he's getting executed for insulting Baal." The priests are like, "Yeah, we're in." So they bring all the food in, they set it all up just like they do every night, and the priests leave. Daniel pulls the king aside and goes, "Yo, Cyrus, let me show you something." And he gets a bunch of ashes, and he scatters ashes all over the ground so that only the king knows that they're there. They then close the door, they seal the door, and they go to bed. The next morning, they wake up, and everything's gone. All the stuff's been eaten. Cyrus proclaims, Bel is great. See, he there's no lie in you. I knew this was true. Daniel starts laughing. And Daniel goes, look at the ground. And in the ashes, they find the footprints of men, women, and children. A whole bunch of them. What it turns out is that there was a hidden chamber in the floor of the temple. And each night, when they would seal the door, the priests and their families would come in and eat and drink all the food and wine and everything that was in the place, so that it would appear that Bel had done it. So, this enrages the king. He makes them show him how they had done this with the trapdoor, and then all the men, women, and children are killed, because of course they are. This is a story involving El. There has to be child death. So yeah, a key feature is that Daniel constantly reminds the reader that El is more powerful than any other god. That is a big thing with Daniel is always pitting El up against the other gods and mocking anybody who doesn't believe in his god. Yeah, you love happy endings. Well, gotta put them all to death for peace. Yeah, that's pretty much the move here. But yeah, so locked door mystery. How was the man killed inside the room where the door was locked? Or how did the person get in and steal the thing? Yeah, this is one of the earliest known cases of that story. And again, I think what's interesting here, it never really outright tells you that El is who tells David or Daniel how they're doing this. It's more like Daniel actually just seems to be outsmarting this guy. Like, it never says in the text that El showed Daniel that there was a trap door. And it goes as far as to show that Daniel didn't necessarily know where the trap door was, because the king makes the priest show it to them afterwards. So you're kind of led to believe that Daniel basically took this risk because he believed that his God was the only real God, so that if that was the case, then there must be a scientific reason for why the food was disappearing every night. And the scientific reason was that these guys and their families were coming and eating it every night. So, that's the first story. And, a bunch of families slaughtered for keeping up a ruse that did nothing but make people happy. But, Daniel wasn't hearing that. Alright, trigger warning for those who like dragons. Daniel and the Dragon. It was Scooby-Doo with a lot of murder. That's all it was. Then they pulled Cyrus's face off and realized he was Old Man Jenkins. Cyrus thinks dragons are cool. Daniel's a bit of a dick about it. Yeah, this story starts off, the Bel story has just happened. Cyrus, his ego's a little bruised, Daniel just kind of made him look dumb. Usually kings killed you for that kind of stuff, but not Daniel. So, Cyrus, his pride's a little bruised. He goes, well, dragons. Am I right? And Daniel goes, what do you mean? He goes, the dragons, man. They're amazing. Even you have to admit that dragons are amazing. Daniel's completely unimpressed. And Cyrus goes, dude, there's a dragon that lives here. It's a freaking dragon. How do you not think you should, worship a dragon? It's a dragon. And Daniel goes, not only am I not impressed, but I can kill that dragon without a sword or a club. But he's nice enough to ask for permission first. He says, if with your permission, I'll go kill that dragon, and I don't need any weapons to do it. So Daniel makes some cakes out of pitch, hair, and fat, and then he feeds them to the dragon. We get no word on how this dragon that Daniel seems to think is, needs killing, why it just willingly eats this stuff. It's almost like the thing was a pet. So Daniel's now around here killing people's pets. He's a jerk. There's no other way to look at it. But he feeds it that stuff, and the dragon explodes. People are not happy that the dragon exploded. I don't blame them. Like, he blew up a dragon. Dragons are cool. But, yeah, the people are not happy, and they are pretty pissed off at Daniel for this one, as well as the king for allowing Daniel to kill the dragon. And again, I think it's important when we look at this. It never says in there that El helps Daniel kill the dragon. Nowhere in the text does it say that El gave him the dragon killing recipe, that as a space dragon himself, that El knew what you couldn't eat and was like, hey, if we eat pitch and hair and fat, we'll explode. Nobody, there's no mention of that. There's no mention of how, and in some variations of this text, what he makes the cakes out of varies a little bit, but it's always just kind of some disgusting stuff. You did miss the murdery Scooby-Doo. But yeah, no. Again, it's never stated why Daniel has this knowledge, where Daniel became a dragon slayer, why Daniel wants to kill dragons, or any of that. None of this is explained to us. It's just, hey, Daniel decided this dragon should die. Now there's a dead dragon. People are upset about it. I don't blame them. So naturally, they respond in the way that people responded to things back then, with a good old-fashioned lion's den. Yeah, yeah, why did you murder this thing? To prove I could. Exactly, Chris. That's what happened here. So, what we have here is the updated text of Daniel in the lion's den. Because Daniel now is taken and tossed in the lion's den by the angry people. And I just wanted to read this because this is good fun. We gotta get the lion's den investment back. So they threw Daniel into the lion's den, and he was there for 6 days. There were 7 lions in the den. There's that number again. And every day they had been given 2 human bodies and 2 sheep. 2 bodies a day. I don't want to know what they did to make sure that the body train kept rolling, because that's 14 people a week. I mean, maybe crime was rampant. Maybe, I can't imagine you wanted to feed diseased bodies to the lions. Then your lions would get disease. So, I don't know. But, yeah. But now they were given nothing so that they would devour Daniel. There's got to be some fat lions. Now, the prophet Habakkuk was in Judea. We'll do a whole thing on Habakkuk later because, yeah, he was kind of crazy. He had made a stew and had broken bread into a bowl, and he was going into the field to take it to the reapers. He's a nice guy. He's taking food out to the guys that are out working in the fields. But the angel of the Lord said, Habakkuk, take the food you have to Babylon, to Daniel in the lion's den. That's only, a long way away. Habakkuk said, Sir, I have never seen Babylon, and I know nothing about the lion's den. Then the angel of the Lord took him by the crown of his head and carried him by his hair with the speed of the wind. He set him down in Babylon, right over the den. That's why we had that picture earlier. An angel snatched him up by his hair and flew him across. That's exactly what it is, Shore. It's a Bible cameo. This was super common in, literature of the time. And so somebody rewrote this story and was like, I don't want to read about a guy in a lion's den unless a prophet from Judea flies in by his hair with a bowl of soup. It's just not as interesting. And you know what? He was fucking right. And Habakkuk shouted, Daniel, Daniel, take the food God has sent you. I mean, I made it and all, but never mind, don't worry about it. Daniel said, You have remembered me, O God, and not forsaken those who love you. So Daniel got up and ate. And the angel of God immediately returned Habakkuk to his own place. This went on for 6 days. Oh, a spectrum ad. That's the worst. On the seventh day, the king came to mourn for Daniel. So he felt bad about, letting him kill the dragon, and then the whole people are pissed, and apparently this king has no power to control the mobs. So they just take people and throw them in his lion's den whenever. And so Daniel got up. So the king shouted with a loud voice. He came to mourn for Daniel. When he came to the den, he looked in. And there sat Daniel. The king shouted with a loud voice, You are great, O Lord, the God of Daniel, and there is no other besides you. Then he pulled Daniel out, and he threw those into the den who had attempted his destruction, and they were instantly eaten before his eyes. So the ending is the same. The lions don't eat Daniel. Daniel just gets soup from Habakkuk. And then the king shows up and realizes, hey, wait a minute. I don't have to put up with these shit of these people. And he throws them in the lion's den, where those hungry lions just start chomping down, making up for all those days that they hadn't had something to eat by eating all these people who dared to think that Daniel killing a freaking dragon that apparently you could just walk up and feed was a dick move. I don't know that there's any good guys in that story, but I certainly know that it's not Daniel. Just being a smartass does not justify the behavior that he exhibited. Daniel had a show in Vegas. Oh man. But yeah, that is the story of Bel and the Dragon. I have always found it fascinating just because it's kind of crazy. It's all over the place. We've got Daniel makes a dragon explode for no reason. We've got a Scooby Doo mystery that ends in child murder. And then we have a guy flying by his hair, a soup delivery service that involves flying by your hair. Yeah, I don't know. I was like, is there a good guy in any of these stories? I guess Cyrus. No, he ordered all those kids dead. No, he's a bad guy too. Everyone's a bad guy. The Bible is filled with bad guys. Everybody's a heel. So, thank you for joining me this week. I hope you enjoyed our little the Bible. Everyone's a heel. That's my assessment. So I hope you enjoyed our time in the Deuterocanonical scriptures. There's some wild stuff in there, cause the Christian Bible 66 books, the Catholic Bible 73. Those extra 7 have got some wild shit. Although it makes sense why the Catholics kept them more so than the Protestants, because a key feature of both 1 and 2 Maccabees and Tobit, which are 3 of the other books that made it in that the Christians don't recognize, they emphasize a strong nature that just believing in God isn't enough. That you have to be a good person and you have to do good things. And if there's anything Protestants hate, it's being good people and doing good things. They just want to believe stuff and have their belief be good enough. And it's not. So they just cut the books out that disagree with them. So, thank you for being here this week. And remember, just because something doesn't validate your worldview doesn't mean you get to cut it out of the book. That's not mature behavior. and it's not good for anybody. So I hope you all have a blessed rest of your Sunday and a good end to your holiday weekend. And take care. And thank you all for being here, everybody. But yeah, we will be back on Wednesday with another Real Scary. And we will be back on Sunday with another sermon. So take care, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day. Be good to each other. And read the text even if it doesn't validate your beliefs.